So hi everybody and welcome back. I would like to make this video to show you how I usually build up my trucks as a conversions. As you probably know, I used to sell parts. Basically, I used to sell the part that the modeler is a little bit in trouble to make it by his own. They are parts intended for quite experienced modelers. This is just not stuff for beginners. And also the idea to reproduce something incredibly special like the old Italian trucks from the 60s was. Uh, that's it. So I mean, when I when I produce these items, my idea is constantly to provide something that is a basic part to allow all the modelers around the world to produce something incredibly special. This is indeed my newest item, that is the Lancia Esagama E, and it was a truck of the 60s, produced before Fiat took over the Lancia production of trucks. Lancia is all over, was nowadays no longer, was all over the world, famous for the racing cars, for the Lancia Delta, 037 S4, Stratos, that was the famous Lancia around the world, but in Italy and along Europe, and also inside Africa right now, because they are still active. They were also quite famous to produce extremely high quality trucks and commercial vehicles. So it was back in time. It was probably, I think, Lancia had been founded in 1907, if I'm not wrong, and Vincenzo Lancia was a visionary guy, exactly in the same way of Enzo Ferrari, but he was much more branded to have a kind of Italian Mercedes brand. So the level and the quality of the detail was always in the highest possible level ever. And what I do here, it is basically to explain how I plan to do the chassis. Because when I sell the cab, for me it's impossible to provide different type of chassis. These trucks, I think, like all the other production among Europe, from Volvo, from MAN, from Mercedes, and from Renault, they were available in very, very different configuration. And when I was a kid, uh, I remember that the most common configuration of this ordinary truck was the ordinary lorry version. So I mean the cab, the driving place, and the rear trailer connected to the cab. I don't know which is the technical name of this type of lorry. And indeed, what I like more when I build up models, it is the tractors model. So I mean the trucks intended like you see them today. So a front trailer part with 2, 3, 4, 5 axles, depending on what type of truck that you want to build up, plus a trailer. Trailer is usually in a standard measure. I think it's around 12 meters, something like that. I have been back in time, back in my days when I was younger, a truck driver too, for racing cars. That's why I'm so much inside racing models and so on. And I remember that it was a quite interesting world, despite the work was quite heavy, not only for the stuff that you have to load around, but for the traffic condition that you have in Italy. I was mostly driving around Italy and somewhere in some little around Europe, but anyway related to Italy mostly. And the traffic condition of this type of work was absolutely not my life, so I was really, really getting into the pressure. I liked the vehicles, because they were quite decent. I used to drive Eurotech and Eurostar, so it was stuff of the early 2000s, late 90s, but it was absolutely something that I could not go on also because it was so easy and so frequent to have car accident and tragedies, going on. So that was not my life, but I remained interested in the stuff. So, and I remember some data about the stuff, about that period, about the numbers of the stuff that it was used to drive. I remember constantly the horsepower of the trucks was nearly every time impressive, and mostly I was carrying race cars, so every time that I stopped, everybody, also the other drivers, much more skilled than me, used to make question about what are you driving, did you make a tuning on the brakes and so on. So there was millions of possibility of grade up the modern trucks in the engine with the proper map, with different settings, kind of tuning to make them more powerful. They are incredibly strong machines. And already back in time, this old Lancia was possible to make a big tuning of the real vehicle I'm talking. And the original Lancia motor, that I'm making here like a mock-up, was a straight 6-cylinder inline. And Lancia didn't provide the V8. It was the first company providing the turbo inside the truck, the first company in the world, I think. And they started with the 6-cylinder, and when Fiat overtook, they start also to produce the even more powerful V8 motor. You know, it is nothing compared to today powerful, because I remember the back in time, the highest power you can have from these toys was around 260 horsepower, 280 horsepower if you make proper tuning, you know, proper tuning with the carburation and the fuel pump and so on. And instead today, I think the record is taken by a Volvo with something like 780 horsepower. So it's a power of a battle tank, you know. It's impressive, really, really impressive. Volvo really set the point, you know, high up in this stuff. And also for about this Esagamma, they used it to make modification about the engine, because the original Lancia engine was extremely, it was a good motor, you know, but it was anyway a motor from the early 60s, you know. Lancia has a very, very long history of making trucks, coming from the Lancia 3RO, coming from the Second World War, and it was also famous because it was loading the gun, a big 90 millimeter gun. It was named the Autocannone. It was a really strange vehicle provided by Italians. It was a truck with a very, very big gun on the back, you know. And I don't know about the stability when you fire such piece of ammo, because of course they had the side steps to keep it steady, but you know, it's anyway a truck, so it's something that belonged to the past. And so they were also back in time used to modify these trucks, changing the originally Lancia engine with the following, because the truck was anyway produced until 1964. It means that anyway they were available for sale until the early 70s, you know, 72, 73, something like that, like a brand new machine from the dealers. And you can anyway make a modification to change a straight 6 from Lancia with the much more powerful motor arriving lately in the 70s, early in the 70s, sorry. That was the one featuring the power inside the 691 and the 180. That was the most powerful unit. Translated in ordinary word, it means that this truck switched from an ordinary average speed of 50 km per hour to an amazing speed on the road, if alone without any carrying behind, of 160 km per hour. 160 km per hour, and they were effective, they were real km per hour. They were not just a number placed there just to show up. It was absolutely legal, but you know, back in time they didn't have so many regulation, and because they were absolutely working machines. So if you have to work with this machine, the concept was everything is allowed because you are working, you have to produce, you have to do something. So also about that, you know, unless you was involved in crashes and so on, it was absolutely ordinary to see this truck so heavily modified. So you never know what there is under the bonnet of these monsters, you know. And basically, to return to the purpose of the original video that I wanted to do today, it was to make a little explanation about, after this first explanation about how the real truck used to be, used to exist. So the idea is to show up how I make my chassis. You know, chassis is something critical in the models, because it's something that absolutely, if you produce a tractor tractor is just the cab and the axle, so uh, no trunk on the truck. It is just the one with the big hook here, and then you load a trailer later. You know, they were not so common in Italy back in the day, because they have rules regulation about the dimension of the vehicle. So if you make a vehicle in the modern configuration, you know, like an ordinary lorry, they had to pay more taxes, and they had more restriction about the load that they can have. So that's why they prefer to have the ordinary lorry with the truck connected to the same chassis and overload it going to the top. Something that you can probably see today in Africa picture, you know, when you see the guy in Africa that loads these old Italian trucks. Everybody changed the motor down there with something from Mercedes, from Caterpillar. There is everything under the chassis of the truck, because the mechanical part of this stuff is just very, very heavy and very, very chunk. It's not something that is sophisticated and so on. I used to see videos of the guys that make fixing of modern vehicles and crashed cars and so on YouTube, and sometimes you see that they get very, very big issues, not only around the fixing of the motor part, but just about the electronics and the EQ, the electronic part that have to communicate by themselves with the gear shaft, with the transmission, with the light, with everything, with the bonnet, with the trunk, with the doors, with everything and so on. Instead, in these older trucks, you don't have anything at all. It's just a mechanical part. So if you can deal with it, and it is pretty easy, you know, if you have a good garage, you can make heavy manufacturing of heavy parts and motors and so on, you can make these items work basically forever. There is picture of them, I think, taken in Libya, where they still have modified everything. Some of them you neither recognize if they are any longer Italians or American. There is a very, very nice picture that I think I have on one of my social media. They show up an Italian Mustache, the Chinese 6, the buff version, the first one, with something that is absolutely, I think, or a Mac or a Caterpillar under, because you see that the shape is not absolutely that, the front wheel is not absolutely stuff. It's something that have been hugely modified. It is in service currently right now in Libya. So it is monsters that have to, with a proper filter, to cross the desert. So it's incredible, really, really incredible, even from a modeling point of view. When I build up the chassis, then I usually decide what kind of version I prefer to build, and usually my idea is that I personally like the configuration of the 6x4. 6x4 means there is a 6 wheel and 4 of them are the driving wheels. The driving wheels is the motion one. Instead, the 2 remaining part is just the steering wheel, and like you see in the front one of this. And several of these truck of the 60s also have an interesting configuration of the secondary steering wheel. You know, so sometimes you see the first wheel and the second wheel, that they are not traction wheels, plus the 2 traction wheel, the double rear traction wheels on the rear side. You know, I don't know if I am so technical in this, because as I said, I was just for a short limited time of period in my life just an ordinary truck driver for a racing company, for a car racing company. So I don't know so much in the technical about those vehicles. You know, I just like to build them up as models, to have them in my collection. You know, and sometimes you can see the double steering. That was interesting because they wanted to give a try of help to the vehicle to load and to divide better the carry of the load around all the chassis. Instead, the version that I like best, for me, it is something that was common until a few years ago, because now they started the game, probably they changed again the rules to make the 4-axle instead of 3-axle, 1, 2, 3. They started to make the 4-axle, so you have 2 on the front wheel, 2 in the back wheel. And now also in Sweden I usually used to start to see 5-axle or even 6-axle, you know. So they have two double, another smaller one, and an even smaller one for longer trailer. I don't know really the purpose of it, but absolutely something that they have calculated and they have made for the purpose, you know. Instead, my idea is to produce the 6x4. So for this, you know, the Esagama He, to all the guys that have already taken the cab, I used to provide every time all the documentation that I found around in Italy and all over the internet about this truck, mostly about the measures, you know, because if you have to produce something like this, you need a proper measure, a proper blueprint, and it's written in Italian, but I think you can absolutely understand everything. The measure are in millimeters, being Italian trucks, the weight are in kilos, and you make your own conversion in which you are more comfortable to have. So this is the version you see. A due assi motori, it means 2 double rear motion wheels, that too. And of course there is also the ordinary version with only 1 single wheel in the front of it. That was probably the most common, you know, the 4x2. It is all the stuff that Italeri do much more often about trucks, also because it is quite more common configuration. Also remember there was back in time a kind of rule about taxes that they had to pay, about the configuration of the wheels and how many wheels touch the asphalt. So the more they weight, the more they touch the asphalt, probably the more you pay. That is also correct, you know, because of course the friction that you do with 4 more big motion wheels on a truck is absolutely much more than 2 ordinary wheels. That's why, you know. And when I do this type of configuration, because I want to build up this as a gamma exactly the same way as I did for my 697-300, you know, the Fiat, the heavy Fiat that I made many years ago, and now I think it was 2015 right now. And fuck, man, time passed very, very quick here, I see that. And I would like to build it up as a 6x4, you know. So because this one was nearly famous to be even more powerful than the 697, despite it was much less famous, you know. So many guys around the forums told me that they didn't see the truck before. Instead, many guys from Africa write to me and they say we currently are using it. So it's really strange stuff, you know. But in this version, usually they were using like tipper trucks, like stuff working in caves and around the mountains and so on. So were used to load extremely heavy stuff. And for this purpose, you have to work on a proper rear suspensions. You know, these trucks of the 60, this was a 1964 trucks. Used to have a kind of suspension that was named the boogie. Sorry for my black. Yep, working. This was a configuration used from the trucks of the 60s, and they cannot be like American trucks, like the most common American trucks, because they already in the 60s they started to have the air suspension that is much more comfortable, that is much more easy to work. It is the one used, for example, by Peterbilt from the Peterbilt of the 60s, to have an idea. But already when I built it up, yeah, it's a Peterbilt of the 60s, I think, you know, because in the 50s they still have the leaf springs, so the leaf springs should be placed in some position. Probably, I don't know really the technical reason why they switched from the air suspension to the spring lift, and vice versa, you know. But this type of suspension was quite common. I think it was an Hendrickson copyright. Hendrickson was an American company from Michigan making the suspension for all the Peterbilt and the Mack. All the American trucks are made by Hendrickson company, you know, and they made something that was so common in the trucks of the Second World War, and it was nicknamed the boogie, you know, and that is the schema of the boogie. As you see, there is a big bar under and connected to the differentials, and up there you have the leaf spring over, and it is connected to a big bar going directly to the chassis, so it's very limited in the movement, you know. It cannot really work like an ordinary suspension taking all the difference of the ground, you know, but it is just made to give the full power motion over the two real axle, you know, and it is usually made to move extremely heavy stuff. So it's the heaviest purpose ever of this stuff is made to this configuration, you know. So what I basically did here, it was to divide the measures of the original blueprint, that is the measure of the real truck. You divide it there in the 24, you see divided 24, divided, so you can have all the blueprints measured, compared in 124, and then you have to keep a constantly eye to how the truck will look at the end. So I try to place it down the camera because I would like to use two hands here to have an idea. Then you center, I made a pin there, you see, I made a pin there in the front wheel. This is the old Continental one that I made in racing, and I try to, it's not so easy, you know. If the camera fall off, you understand. Anyway, this is the point where you can, damn, I just closed it because I have to enlarge the wheelbase of the front carriage, you know. Anyway, the position is this one, and basically it's helpful because you will have, you see, so you have to center basically, oh, now it's better. You have to center basically that position when you see the central hook of the wheel is centered there, and then compare it to the picture, you know. Some of these vehicles have the side fender that was a little bigger, so it is not every time like this one. This was the most standard one, that was the thinner one. They also had that version, and they also had the combo version, so there was absolutely everything, you know. As I said, if you see the folder of picture that I have of the real vehicle, you can see all the difference that they had on this configuration, you know. But usually when you have that stuff done, basically this is the main configuration of the chassis. So you already can see probably the truck in its configuration, in its real dimensions, you know, and it basically match, you know. So we have an overall measure that will be 6690, that will become 278.75 millimeters. So basically it is this dimension. So you have always to respect the dimension of the blueprint, because this is something probably coming from a Lancia, the official Lancia blueprint, so that is the real measure, and you have absolutely to work around that. And then when you set the wheelbase, and in this model, for example, is not so easy, because if you have just a two-axle vehicle, it will be much more easy, because you simply take the measure from the center of the wheel. Instead, if you have to make the measure from the center of the boogie suspension, then the boogie to the rear part, to the final external part of the chassis, and then work on the measure and keep every time everything over the proper dimension and proportions, you know. So that's it. And when you go up and fixing the engine, you know, because of these trucks, have didn't never had a configuration about the V8, so the internal tunnel was absolutely slim, was not big like in the Chinese 6 that can host even bigger motor, you know, even if despite neither they had the V8, but they constantly had also the 6, the straight 6 in line, but it was a little bit wider inside, and you had to make the proportion for the motor, you know, that have to fix. Now I don't have the hands for this. But as you can see, the motor fits in this position. Then from the picture you have to take, this is a donor part. Now, then I will talk about a little about what kind of donors I used to take, you know. And you have to choose the position of the motor inside this and just make a lot of dry fit. But usually the motor used to sit a little bit lower than the position of the real trunk. Also there is plenty of picture explaining you how it works. And in these Italian trucks, remember that they were not made with the American Fuller. You know, the American Fuller was a kind of gear shaft very common over American trucks. Probably many say one of the best ever because it is still reliable. After I think nearly 100 years, they are still there working completely mechanical. Eaton Fuller is a company that is really, like to say, the Rolex of the gear shaft. You know, I think in my opinion much better than any ZF. And this American gear shaft is typical because there was some of the first one that have been connected to the block of the motor, you know, so the engine and the gear shaft were basically connected this way. This is of course this type of version because they are coming from a donor kit that was this one. Then I will explain you a little bit later. You know, Matchbox white Road Boss is a white truck, you know, that I use it like a donor. Then I have another white Western Star as another donor, you know. Instead, in the Italian trucks, usually the motor was disconnected by the unit. You know, this is a mistake that many people do, even more when they produce completely exposed chassis. You know, it's so common that you see trucks, also see some guys making that about the new 3D stuff when they clearly lack of documentation, because, you know, if you study a little the picture, you can see clearly that usually the gearbox is constantly separated in those vehicles. So it, instead of being there, it starts to sit here in the middle of the trunk, and then you have another reduction going to the differential. You know, usually the engine could be a little more bit smaller than this. This is just a mock-up that I did to give the proportion to everything, you know. But usually the engine block is there, and the gear shaft became half of it, I think, half. So it should be in this type of dimension. Can be enough just to cut it to give the proper dimension shape, you know. As a donor, like I was saying, you know, this was the schema that you see that I do, because this was an example. I mean, making a 6x4. Probably later on I will going on modifying these two guys, you see, the Krupp Titan and the Wrecker Peterbilt, to make them became the basic lower chassis for a Fiat 690 that had a single traction wheel and a double steering wheel, even in a tractor configuration. Probably that will be the next chassis I will going to build it up here for this purpose. But let's talk about the donor. You know, you see a lot of white plastic plus my wheels in these dimensions. These are the wheels that I modified some years ago, coming from the Krupp Titan. You know, was the original German Trilex modified into the lower European Trilex, you know, with a different sprocket inside, you know, holed. This is one of the last productions that I had, because then recently I changed the pattern of the Continental and they make it available like a Michelin X tire, you know. That is, I think, a little bit nicer than this, because this was in a way coming from a rubber, I mean, just external tire, you know. But it was absolutely common. I've seen many pictures of this as a gamma featuring still the Continental tire. Continental was famous in the Second World War because it was the first equipment of the German trucks. So it was a company from Germany providing tires for trucks. You know, so it was absolutely common to have them also down here in Italy. And the donor truck that I used for this purpose was basically this. I found a bargain price for some older Matchbox kit. Matchbox basically is a reboxing of the AMT trucks. That basically that trucks. And I don't like to say that I don't like this type of truck, but you know, it's the typical white boss that for me have not so much meaning. I mean, I like the long nose track, but I prefer Peterbilt, so not so much the whites. And despite they were incredibly good tracks, but the point is that I always choose these type of boxes because they are the only one that you can find quite easy about the internet, providing the boogie suspension, you know. Also, Italeri made a lot of 6x4 tracks, for example, the Scania and so on, but they don't have the boogie inside. They just have a real dead axle, not motion, even with a double sprocket wheel. So from above, you see that is a 6x4. In reality, it is a 6x2, not a 6x4. And so if you need something with the boogie or the cantilever suspensions, you need something like this. And this is honestly, I think, provided in a nicer shape because they are much more nicer than AMT, just provided, I think, in the Italeri MAN, in the Italeri Mercedes, the first one, 26, whatever. Anyway, the big older Mercedes Benz, what they call it, the desert train, and not so common to find around, honestly. And I think also the Centaur, the first box of the Centaur 6x4, I think we are talking of the oldest box from Italy that are also the nicest kit that they ever did about this vehicle. And it's not so easy to find them around. So if you just search for these ordinary old boxes, these are given to me by a truck driver friend that used to drive here sometimes. Daniele, salute you. And he used to buy a lot of junk, you know, used sheets that probably neither he will never buy. And sometimes many of them, you know, AMT was famous to have bags inside the box, so it was not something that it looks so nice like the modern kit. And you will find all the parts that you can easily modify. It is extremely basic part. The trick with AMT is that every single part must be reworked. They were not so bad, honestly. I was thinking much more because the overall look with this white plastic, it is really something coming from the 70s, like a model, you know. But if you work proper, you know, this is just have been fixed with, I use for this purpose, super glue, and the super glue becoming hard is stone hard and became something very easy to be used. Also like a filler, you know, there you have to define extremely better the lines and so on, and retake with evergreen strip styrene, so it's very easy to make them in a better condition, because you see there is a lot of flashes, there is a lot of missing details, you know, on the parts provided by AMT. It's extremely basic, but the parts are all there. So you have a boogie, you have the differentials in the proper dimension, round one, because sometimes also the Mercedes can provide a boogie schema, but the differential are not rounded. So it is not, when I built up the 697 from Reinhardt truck, you know, the one with the blue container on the back, I remember that it was quite tricky, and they ended up finding some Hendrickson suspension inside the Peterbilt that was a 6x2 and 6x4, sorry, and I could work with the proper bulged differentials, because, for example, already Mercedes, I think, has a different type of differential, so you have to work on something that have been taken from the American trucks, because even if Fiat always denied, because they tried to contact the historical center of the Fiat Veicoli Commerciali, the answer was constantly no, we did it by our own. But if you see the schema, is exactly an Hendrickson suspensions. And because Italy lost the Second World War, we were helped by Americans immediately after the war, by a plan of helps named the Plan Marshall, you know. And in the Plan Marshall, of course, there was also a dismiss of technology coming from the older technology from America and give it to the Italians to go on and try to restart again an ordinary production of vehicles. Not weapons, just ordinary vehicles. So the contract was that you could not produce your own weapon for the time. So you can buy used weapon by other countries, but you cannot produce them. And also the lack of technology. Of course, the American trucks was something that won the war. So they had something that was absolutely a masterpiece in this type of definition. I think it was the same from the Russian trucks. You know, if you take something like the Ural, the Gads, there is some very big Russian monsters, you know, but they have exactly the same identical configuration, and that's why I think that probably, like I did, I think from a plane, it was the Tupolev Tu-2. If you check online, the Tupolev Tu-2 is basically B-29 made by Tupolev, so it was the same stuff. Americans overtake and give the technology about this heavy stuff, and carriage for the ordinary use. That is something that, in my opinion, is absolutely much more useful than produce a plane, a fighter plane, or a battle tank, you know. And anyway, Fiat every time denied and say, no, no, we make it by your own. But I suspect it in the other side, and it is not the first time that it happens to me with the Italian museum, Italian ordinary first desk answers, you know, when you contact them to have information and so on, that they don't know so much what are they talking about, you know, because they answer to me with different and wrong numbers and sizes, you know. It happens, you know. And so that's it. This is the final step configuration for the 6x4. For the moment, I think I will take a pause on it and start to work on the secondary chassis, because these were tracks that I will probably finish during the winter time and in the springtime for the next type of competitions. You know, I would like really to take to a next level of detail and make another track of my series with this Esagamma E, and make it in the proper way. I think it will be like I posted a picture of a green one working in a granite cave when they move big bricks of stones with the truck, so they just need huge power to move this part of mountains inside the working place. So I probably will go on with that type of detail and make it extremely used and weathered like I used to with my model. So for the moment, that's it. Thanks for watching, guys, and see you in the next.